Hello, my name is Dennis Tersch, and I'm here with co-founder of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, Steve Hayes, and we're going to be having a discussion about ACT and training in ACT and ways that psychologists can begin exposing themselves to experiences with ACT. So thanks for being here together, Steve.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation, Dennis. This is going to be fun.
Well, I guess just in a way of beginning, I'm imagining what it would be like for someone who's an experienced psychotherapist who's been working in the field for a long time with methods that they've come to trust, who's curious about ACT, and who's thinking about coming to an ACT workshop. Probably what's going through their mind is, what would the benefit be for me and my clients to begin to sort of learn about ACT?
Yeah. And there's probably also a little bit of a, oh no, not another model, kind of thing. One of the things that I think the ACT community does pretty well is people don't have to check who they are and where they came from at the door. It's kind of surprising in a way because ACT is, deeply committed to developing theories that work. It's part of a intellectual tradition, and that's pretty obvious on the one hand. On the other hand, the question really is, how can we empower our work by being able to do a better job of seeing the places where human beings get into cul-de-sacs and finding a way to help them evolve their lives forward in a positive way. And I think, clinicians have been doing that from the beginning. They come to the table with a lot of skills. What the ACT work brings to the table is not just, this is an interesting take on some of the things that have newly become of interest. It's an acceptance and mindfulness-based procedures. It has things about values, etc. Those are fine, although they're new now, but ACT's been developed for almost now 30 years. But what is inside the ACT work is this ability to take different kinds of techniques, different kinds of methods, and see the processes that underlie them. To see them in your clients and to know something about how to intervene on them, to see them in yourself and to do some of that kind of work and bring that to the table. So I would say the biggest reason is that it kind of is like a catalyst that sort of sits in the middle of a lot of important current issues, but it does it in a way that casts light on the things you already know. Helps you to see maybe some of the things that you're doing that maybe are not as central and as empowering, because there's a lot of kind of historical hangers-on to all of the traditions we come from. And that sort of gives us a way to move forward in community in creating a more adequate psychology. The ACT community and the processes themselves bring people together so that you're at the table with your client in a relationship, but you're also viewing this in a larger context of these processes that have been set loose in the world and that are there in your home and in your school and your organization and your clinic and your practice with your accountant, on the TV screen and your politics. So there's this kind of grounded, expansive quality that I think the work has that empowers our ability to use the moments we have on this planet to make a difference.
When I hear that feels very exciting, and the question that immediately pops into my mind is, what's a process? Like, let's imagine that someone hears this, and there's something in there in what you're saying that speaks to them. And I know that ACT in many ways is a process model, among other things, and it provides a process model, as you said, that cuts across an individual level or a person-to-person level or a community level. But if I didn't really know what you meant by process, how could you flesh that out for me?
I think that actual route just means something like a sequence, like a procession, a parade, and sometimes it's captured by traditions to mean something much more narrow, like we're doing process-oriented groups, let's say. What I'm talking about is being able to see and kind of have terms for, but also a sensitivity for, so you can actually see it. What are the sequence of events that happen in therapy, in a person's life, as they respond to therapy moving forward, that either narrow their life down or expand their life out? And if you can get the number of processes down to a manageable set, because we just can't keep 30 things in our head at once. We're not cognitively able enough. We're simple creatures in many ways. But if you can get it down to a handful or two, that's enough when you've done the work to sort of see these sequences. I felt this, I noticed this, my attention went there, this emotion arose, I lost my perspective on the person in front of me. Those kinds of processes that can lead people into difficulty, and ones that can raise people up. And some of the processes that our clients have been participating in are massively supported by the culture. And, you can enter into these kinds of patterns that get bigger and bigger and more entangling for not just moments, but months and years and decades. And, people are basically waiting for their lives to start. I sometimes ask folks to ask this of your next client. Do you have a sense that you're waiting for your life to start? And the folks who come in really suffering, they're going to answer yes. And so the processes I'm most interested in are the ones that are stultifying and narrowing versus ones that are liberating. And if we can see those in the clinical work that we do and in the lives of the people we're working with in our own lives, it kind of simplifies our task, but without minimizing it, without turning it into a cartoon. There's a relatively small number of processes I think are really, really, really worth attention, but they're rich, and they're subtle, and they're paradoxical, and they're tricky. They're tricky in our own hearts and minds, and they are in the lives of those that we serve.
So this is generating so many questions. What you're saying is making so much sense, but these different questions are popping into my mind. And one is, I guess, sort of almost like a role play. Like, here I am, and I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, and I know this one from both sides of it over the last 10 years or so. But like, I'm a cognitive behavior therapist. Everything you're saying makes sense, and I want to help people to be able to move in their lives too. So what is it about, say, going to this, like an ACT workshop? What am I going to learn? What kind of a process?
Okay, well, let me give you an example, and let me do it specifically for a person who's been well-trained in CBT. The original name for ACT was comprehensive distancing. I'm glad we let it go because it sounds dissociative, but it actually was a little shout-out for Tim Beck, because distancing was his term. And, he wanted people to catch just that they were thinking and what those thoughts were, and in order so that we can test them and we can see, are they kind of becoming overextended? Are there logical errors in there? Are we allowing to kind of run away with us? To challenge them even. But the distancing process itself turns out to be really, really important, of simply being able to be aware of, in the present, your thoughts as an ongoing process. And it was called comprehensive distancing because we had the idea that, wow, maybe this earliest part of that protocol you could build out, because that's a process that could be really important. And let's look at the positive and negative forms of it. When you normally interact with your thinking, you don't do it with awareness of the process of thinking. you simply look at the world structured by your thinking. And all therapies, I think, and cognitive behavior therapy has a well-developed technology for that, tries to kind of get people to back up and to look at that and to do something about it. Well, just the backing up process, though, does something about it. When you take a step back from the chatter and you see it, it changes its function in your life. I'll give you some examples. I mean, you can hold contradictory thoughts at once. If you're simply watching it, we do have contradictory thoughts, And there's people like, Marshall Linehan, that are dialectical, really has sort of gone into, these kinds of polarities and not just that. I mean, the Gestalt folks and others have often, long been on to this. Well, we did a series of studies and kind of clinical work and basic studies showing that thoughts, the literal meaning of thoughts, is a key feature of drawing you into entanglement with them. And it's the kind of entanglement that when you're drawn in, they disappear. I'm not thinking anything. I'm just in this world that is this way. Like, I'm a bad person, and I'm not appreciated, and this is not a safe place. And, the chatter machine goes on, and there's no gap there between the referential category and the experience. Conversely, what we call diffusion, which is simply changing your relationships to your thought and using many, many different means that undermine literal meaning as the only sort of feature of thought that's interesting, and looking at it in other ways, kind of playing with it, kind of pulling it at its joints. And in that work, a sense of space opens up. Now, it turns out that is work that's been going on the planet ever since language evolved to the point that it started grabbing people by the throat. I mean, there are spiritual and religious traditions that have been working on how to do exactly that. All of the mystical wings of our spiritual and religious traditions, for example, have ways of messing around with the literal analytical meaning of language, whether that's silence for days, months, years at a time, or as it's contemplating koans that have no simple, logical, analytical answer, or it's chanting or saying a single word over and over again, repeating mantras. And what we think we bring to the table that is does respect to those traditions, but also adds to them, is to dig down and say, what is the pivotal process here? And the pivotal process, we believe, is this issue of the dominance of literal meaning or awareness of languaging in flight. And if you kind of see that that's the process, then suddenly you're turned loose. And the ACT community has created hundreds of these little micro techniques that well-timed, well-placed, you can't just lay them on top of people, you have to know what you're doing, can liberate human beings from the cognitive chains that are holding them down, that look so heavy and made of steel, but actually are made of smoke. They're an illusion. They're an illusion of mind. And even in the self-help work and stuff, and Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, I've got a little piece in there of like making up your own diffusion methods. I mean, once you see how the illusion works, it's like learning magic tricks. You can make up your own, and you can make up your own ways of slipping out of the knot and not being sawed in half, and other things that look like magic, but once you know how it works, there's a lot of things that we can do with the analytic, judgmental, predictive, evaluative, problem-solving, literal mode of mind, other than argue with it, replace it, run from it, try to, take what's in it and kind of rearrange it. We can also kind of slip out of it, or not come out of it wouldn't be right, but back from it. And that's empowering. That gives people a little gap in which life can happen, even with a lot of negative, habitual, entangled, elaborated chatter, which most of us have and our clients have in spades.
Well, part of what...
Does that sort of fit what you're looking for?
Yeah, no, I think it does fit, and it also raises a sort of a, or addresses another area that I was kind of thinking about, is there's this strong emphasis in ACT, as far as I can see, on sort of awareness and disentanglement from cognitive content and mindfulness and willingness and these sort of very the processes that deal a lot with interiority. And at the same time, as you were just saying, there's this whole other area which is so reminiscent of very straightforward behavior change methods and a real emphasis on change in behavior. And I guess as I was kind of listening, my mind was concocting this other imaginary, ACT trainee who's a psychodynamic practitioner. And this psychodynamic practitioner, when you're talking about the diving in and sort of engaging with and changing relationships with this internal event, I can imagine the psychodynamic practitioner's head kind of nodding. And then there's this other piece, which I know that modern psychoanalytic kind of thought does pay attention to how people really live their lives, but there's, at least relatively, there's some less of an emphasis on that changing behavior, clarifying really explicitly directions for behavior. So I was just wondering if you could kind of make that connection a little bit more explicitly between the inner and outer.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would add another one, this kind of social expansiveness into things like relationship and so forth. So, well, what we were just talking about is sort of inwardly focused. The model itself kind of also produces an outward focus in the therapeutic relationship and in the social context of the person's life, and then in the direct behavior change and what it is that they're trying to do. I think part of that comes from the larger purpose. I mean, we come to this with the purpose of trying to empower people to live the kinds of life that they value, and we want to understand how it is that behavior gets narrowed. ACT comes out of the behavioral tradition, and it never lost that interest, even though we've opened up, I think, in a way that's not minimizing, to a pretty elaborated analysis and approach to emotion, memory, sensation, and thought. If you look at the cost of entanglement, of avoidance, of mindlessness, and you really ask people what they want when they come to therapy, although the initial statement is going to be often focused on the pain that they're experiencing, if you said, well, if that were solved, if that were no longer an issue, what would you be doing? The person will immediately put on the table things that they deeply want, and they're going to have to do with people and contribution and recreation and living in your life. So people have come in complaining of their pains, but thinking that is the process, removing them as the process through which they can live a more powered and liberated life. And they've kind of put that on hold. I was saying this thing of, waiting for your life to start. That it's as if we've put these other issues on the shelf. Well, if you see that, then what we want to do is we want to be playing with this kind of dance. As you create flexibility here, can we put it towards what it is that you put on hold over there? And when you do that, you're going to hit some of the things that narrow you back down again. I mean, if you really want to have intimate, committed relationships, for example, and that's the context that brings you in complaining of loneliness or depression, as you learn to hold those depressogenic thoughts and difficult emotions and painful memories in a more flexible way, what comes right back on the table is, well, what about intimate, committed relationships? And as you step towards that, you are now going to hit part of the devil's bargain that you are making by backing up from life. The devil's bargain is I will have less of that pain, less potential for it, less frequency of it, if I back up from what I most deeply want. And it turns out that backing up is even more painful. So it's only in the short term it looks like it's a good bargain. So we do dance and act, and I think, therapy, good psychotherapists know about this dance anyway, but again, we have some precision about what the dance is. This dance of how to replace narrowness with breadth and flexibility, and then how to replace a waiting and impulse and avoidant persistence with a flexible pursuit of valued directions, of getting people on about the business of living, not fixing them, not repairing them, not making them gurus, but simply one step at a time, evolving out of a place in which things have gotten narrower and stuck into a place where I'm getting bigger, I'm doing new things, I'm learning, loving, contributing more every day. So it's only in the acting through these values-based actions that you will touch really what these other things were about anyway. I mean, can I tell us a little story on that? Okay, so a lot of people know I had an anxiety disorder and acted sort of deeply involved in that. And, for the longest time, I thought really what the issue was is I just had to get rid of this anxiety. And of course, that went where it went. Even as I sort of moved more in an act direction, I tried to open up to the anxiety. For a long time, it was more like simply kind of making room for it, but not learning from it. And somewhere in there, years into this work, I start finding these strands, like memories coming back or places where I get anxious and seeing patterns. And the particular form my anxiety struggles took were very much around issues having to do with people. And this kind of mix of panic and social anxiety and so forth. And over time, I've come to see it's precisely because some of the experiences where things formed, it was that rich soup of wanting to do something and not sure that you're being able to do it. So I'll give an example. So I'm giving a talk. This is well into the act stuff. I'm feeling really, really anxious. And I'm still doing my talk, right? But then I ask myself, how old are you? And the answer is very clear. I'm 8. I feel like I'm 8. And then maybe a couple weeks, months, I forget the time frame, something similar happens. And I ask myself the same question, and then I just kind of open the door, and like memories kind of go, they kind of flop up. And I remember hiding under my bed when I was 8 and hearing my parents fight in the next room, and my dad is drunk and there's crashes, and I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm going to see when I go in there. And I remember actually having the thought, I am going to do something. But I was 8. There wasn't anything I could do.
Yeah.
There was nothing I could do with those big giants, And my mom's still alive. She's 90. I'm going to visit her in 3 days. And a very sweet lady. And my dad, God bless him, was just suffering so with what he had been through and the losses he had had. And they were doing the best they could, but they're doing it in this very destructive way. Well, here's my connection. I'm in front of a group talking about things. I'm feeling anxious. Well, inside that is this, I want to do something here. People are important. This work is important. And alleviating human suffering is important. And so what I'm kind of saying is this. The importance of kind of opening up and expanding out in areas where it's hard to think, feel, remember, and sense what's present is also about grounding the behaviors that we engage in some of our deepest moments. And it's a rich soup. Some of those things are painful, but they're meaningful. And so for me to back away from anxiety in a crude way, like just snap out, cut it out, snap out of it, would be tantamount to saying, don't care about the reason why you're even a psychologist to begin with.
Mm.
And that is too high a cost. Now, I don't think that we necessarily need to sort of sit on this and sort of have that kind of emotional insight as we learn to avoid these processes that narrow us down and focus more on our values. Life itself will become our therapist, and we will find, as we pursue what we value, some of the things that make sense of and help us to integrate our personality and sort of put together these things that look disparate. And I don't mean analytically put them together, but find a way to sort of carry them as the whole person. I don't know if that's a little bit of a tangent, but maybe it answers
it doesn't,
part of.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a tangent. It kind of connects with me with the experiences that I've had in the ACT workshops and ACT conferences and collaborations and discussions and in our peer supervision group in New York. There's something about the community context where it seems like and feels like something is moving that allows these kind of connections to be made, and in a way that is not at all navel-gazing. There are connections that are made internally, but that are made in a really community social context that allows some forward motion towards what gives life meaning. So I'm wondering if maybe this wouldn't be a nice place to kind of connect this idea of the greater ACT community and ACT processes operating on a community level.
One of the things of which I'm most proud, but also just kind of pleased to see, is as we dig down to what these processes are that liberate people, and we try to do it in a way in which we ourselves are exploring those processes, because we build a model here that's based on the psychology of the normal, not the abnormal. So we don't have the right to do this kind of clinical work if we aren't exploring it. We don't have to be masters at it. We just have to care about it if we aren't deeply committed to exploring these processes in ourselves. And as you do that, it turns out that these processes scale. If you are more accepting of yourself, if you are able to sort of back up from the chatter, if you're able to touch this sense of consciousness that makes that possible and come into this moment and then move your attention towards what you value, as you do that, you are connecting with the very same things that allow you to have a compassion for another person, to have connection for another person, to be able to see the world through their eyes, to be able to listen and not just talk, to find community. And, we see that in the therapeutic work. We know that the working alliance scores, for example, in ACT studies are very high. The acceptability of these interventions is very high. People feel heard, they feel seen, they feel, even though we're coming out of left field, some of these things are very odd. You'd think it would just blow up and people would feel like, what the hell are you talking about? And done crudely, you'll produce that. But, you get, and yet what we know, it's a caromptic, I know I'm getting to where you are, but it's a bit of a caromptic. We know that if you take things like the working alliance and then you put in all these ACT processes of acceptance, diffusion, present moment, flexibility, sense of perspective taking, values and action, those measures in the client, in the clinical work we do, will actually remove a chunk of the variance in the therapeutic alliance. And the reason is the therapeutic alliance is important precisely because already in relationships that are intimate, committed, and empowering, these processes are present. Here's what I'm saying. One advantage of having a scientifically based approach that is process-oriented and is not so concerned about packages and names and labels and hierarchy and all the woo-ha is that you now have dug down to processes that are there, whether or not you're talking about them this way or that way, that are important regardless of the traditions you come from. And these processes, it turns out, just by the way that we are arranged, we are a social species. We're arguably a eusocial species. The only primate like that. I mean, there are ants and termites, but what we're doing is so far up on the cooperation and prosociality scale compared to other. I mean, it's in our genes to care about each other. And these repertoire narrow or expansive processes, when you touch them and expand them, go into the therapeutic relationship, but then they start scaling into your relationship with your spouse at home, and into your coworkers, and into your communities and neighborhoods, and into your scientific societies. So you get a whole bunch of kind of ACT folks together, and it's not because this is airy-fairy, new age woo-ha, where everybody's going to sing Kumbaya or something. You get people who are exploring these processes in themselves, and they just sort of naturally tend to move towards group processes, group structures that reflect those same processes. Mm-hmm. And they're neat, they're fun, they're empowering. And one of the things that people would find, like we're going to be the next World Conference, the 10th, is going to be in D.C. in July, the 23rd and 25th. What people will find if they get around these folks, as you've founded these workshops and organizations around it, is it tends to be open, penetrable, non-hierarchical. We're not going to fight over, you're not a behaviorist and you don't know about X, but etc. So there's something that happens when people show up and connect with others around this work, where the connection is not something like, here are the answers and here are the words and you have to learn these and do these and here are the techniques, and when you do all that, then you get certified and then you're in the club. It's not like that. It's something more like, here's the territory. Here's the domain we want to get to. What are your ideas about how best to do that? And let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation about that. Let's try. And so the ACT community is, the ACBS is the International Society. It's more than 4,000 strong. About half are outside of the U.S. 5 years ago, it was about 500 strong. It's growing very, very fast. And there are chapters all around the world that are formed or are forming. And people asking ourselves this question: what would psychology be like if we could focus on the we around a scientific approach that was bottom up and tried to focus on what the important processes are, but that was open and participatory, and the we was not just even the clinicians, but also the bench scientists and the applied scientists and the students and the philosophers and even members of the public. And can we come together as a human community and use Western science in a way that empowers this exploration of some of these deepest human issues without minimization, without wallowing, without navel watching, but trying to simplify and empower our work. What would it be like? And I think we're exploring that. I think we're actually kind of asking that. So you find humanists and existentialists and analysts and cognitive behavior therapists and hardcore behavior analysts and all kind of hanging out together. That just does not happen easily. It's a challenge, and I think using these processes, it kind of gives you an example of what you might be able to create if we could create accepting, mindful, values-based groups and organizations. It might be kind of neat what we could create.
Well, I think it's certainly neat, and that's, if I may, the story that you told, the personal story, was very moving, to hear, person to person, but it also just fleshed out, I think, in a way, a common process, for people who are taking part in ACT training, in this case the trainer himself at that moment, but sort of making a connection with their present moment pain or their experience, what's going on right now, and then in my history, what is my mind telling me about that? Okay, and then kind of like, as you said, not really getting away from it, but kind of stepping sort of back from it just enough so that there's some working distance, just enough workable distance, and then there was something about what you said that really carried it forward into the social domain. It wasn't anxiety can be so much about me, what am I feeling, how can I deal with this, and connecting with this value of I want to do something, I want to be connected, I want to be involved in some kind of compassionate process, which to me just feels like sort of inherently transformational. And I think when you have a room full of like analysts and hardcore behaviorists and people having agreements and disagreements and coffee and experiential exercises, there's something that just moves from that one individual kind of moment of awareness and awareness of pain into something that's inherently about community and about some kind of change, which is really cool.
It is cool. It is cool, and I think that our better traditions have always been on this, but finding a way to actually create that as part of a professional and scientific community is kind of a cool extension. And we have to find a way to bring ourselves in. If evidence-based treatment is going to mean that we take manuals, and I like manuals, but if we take them and we put them on people, and worse, we find ourselves advising things and trying to use things that we know when things get really dark for us, are not very helpful for us, then we're kind of demanding that evidence-based care be turned into something that has an element of fraudulence about it. And we just cannot allow it to end up there. It's too important. And science is too powerful. So the alternative is to try to drill down to these evidence-based processes that are in us, and they're in our relationship, and they're in our clients. And then this connection between our personal experience and what the process and scientific evidence is showing can kind of come into line. And now we've got kind of the head part of us, working with the heart part of us. And then we can learn kind of the hand part of us to do this clinically. And if you can get the head, hand, and heart all working together, there's something just cool about that and joyful and expansive about that. I don't want, because we've been exploring these areas, I don't want people to hear that, ACT is necessarily going to be about long-term psychotherapy and, exploring the deepest of the deep issues, etc. Sometimes just bumping people forward in very short interventions, primary care interventions that are 15 minutes long. We have data on similar kinds of things in ACT. Or in some of our systems of care, you're only going to have 3 or 4 sessions.
Yeah.
The modal number of sessions is 1. You have to do something that doesn't just, say, well, I didn't do any good there. I mean, we have to be doing good from the first moment, because in some of these systems of care challenges that we have now with our healthcare system and so forth. And we found ways to do that. We actually have evidence that you can do some of these things in a very short period of time. And now it's not that you've done all of what you do, you had a longer period of time. That's not realistic. But when you see what the key processes are and you can see them and intervene on them, that makes a difference, and it makes a difference going forward. We have data on several ACT trials with very short interventions, lasting a long time, and sometimes even expanding their influence from post to follow-up, because we've grabbed those core processes, we've made some progress on them, and then life itself becomes the person's therapist. And, permanently for everything, no. But, come on back. We're like a family. I like the family dentist model. We're not fixing people. We're empowering and supporting people. And if you leave and you bump into something, come on back. And so this is something you can probably speak to, Dennis, because I'd be interested in your sense. Most experienced ACT clinicians, when they start using this and then people come back, the people who made progress in an ACT approach, who then come back, you can make progress very fast. There's some new issue that's come up, and it's kind of like, that doesn't apply. And these processes are so broad yeah, it does apply. And then you see how it applies, and then you take all of the progress you've made before, and it kind of like, oh, I see how I can do that. And then, whoosh, and then maybe a year or two later that the person's coming back and they have stumbled again. And, okay, well, welcome to the human race.
Absolutely.
I've been stumbling and falling in these ACT processes ever since I got on to them 30 years ago. And I'm never going to get them nailed. Can I tell a story about that one?
Sure, please.
Okay. I developed tinnitus, one too many who concerts. It's really loud. It's really loud right now. And over a period of about 4 years, and I'm turning on noise things, I'm putting in earplugs, it's really, really bothering me. It's waking me up. I'm thinking about it all the time. And I start having suicidal thoughts. If I just shoot myself, then the noise will go away. And it finally occurs to me to apply what I've worked for 30 years of my life on, my entire professional life, to apply it to that. Just never. That's how dumb people be. And within a week, it's 100% solved. 100%.
Mm.
And it's been now 3-4 years since. We've actually developed measures of this now. We've done randomized trials. I've worked with Gerhard Anderson in Sweden, who's one of the world's experts on it. We just have a study came out beating the best and most popular psychosocial method out there for tinnitus. It's a huge problem, by the way, and because it seems to be biological, which of course it is, the psychologists have not had much involvement with it. And it turns out we can do a lot with a little. Some of these protocols are very, very short. Well, so what I'm just saying is that don't be hearing, because of the depth of the concerns, that this only has the manifestation in depth-oriented work.
Yeah.
It will fit there very nicely, but in lots of situations, people are not getting paid to do, long-term, psychotherapy and so forth, and we have to find a way to be very useful and still respect some of these deeper issues, still not minimize the human experience, because that hollows out not just our work and its impact, it hollows out our professional lives, and we start walking through feeling like we're, kind of robots or climbing into a clown suit when we go into work, and then, we're just going through the motions, and I can show you the data that down that road lies not just burnout, but relative ineffectiveness in the people you do work with. So just in the interest of those we serve, we got to stay true to ourselves, because we're the instrument that we're bringing in to these interactions when we're doing clinical work.
I think one of the sort of warmest and gentlest surprises that clients whom I've worked with have discovered when they discover an ACT style of working is that a lot of different things are okay, and a lot of lengths of treatment are okay, and a lot of areas of emphasis. Years of people coming in and saying, well, this is CBT, so I'm supposed to focus on now, right? And of course, CBT does talk about the past, more traditional CBT, or early in my career with psychodynamic approaches, people feeling they needed to go deeper, even particularly in the VA system. Some wonderful supervisors I worked with who, clients would come in and they'd say, well, I don't want to dig too deep because of this trauma experience. And there's this sort of false dichotomy that something has to either be short-term and superficial or long-term and like going into the labyrinth and getting lost. And I think clients can really breathe and sort of relax into an ACT model when they recognize that, it's okay to work on procrastination or chronic pain or trauma or, some longer-term relationship with self-loathing or something that's a little bit less, specific. So I'm really glad you're emphasizing that flexibility, because it's one of the things I think my clients most love about this sort of way of working.
Well, and I think also clinicians, because you can come at it from many, many, many different professions and in many different kind of settings and find a piece that really works for you, and the breadth of areas that it applies to. And it turns out we're dealing with processes, this issue of repertoire narrowing versus expansion, and what are the selection criteria. You're dealing with processes that are so basic to the evolution of a human life, that in randomized trials, you can take these methods and apply them to dealing with chronic disease or substance abuse or depression or anxiety or work issues and relationships and anger and so forth. So having, and it's not that we're like one-trick ponies taking protocols and just dumping them on people's heads. What we're doing is we're bringing this simplified set of processes that connect with many of our clinical traditions, so you don't feel like a stranger in a strange land. You can start using things you already know right now. But then through community, we've learned how to do new things. We have developed new techniques. It's not just relabeling what we already do. And as we focus down and kind of do that, the many different disciplines involved in behavioral health writ large and the many different settings that we have, we have this kind of joyful thing. I literally laugh out loud when I realize we're playing around with these things that have been in our culture for thousands of years, and we're getting paid to put it in the healthcare system. I mean, come on. And not just that, but maybe even the schools and organizations and businesses and maybe even just healthcare. Even that's too narrow. And what a cool time that is. And to do it not just because we're chest thumping and say we've got the answer and, everybody ought to be Buddhists or something like that. But we've drilled down to what some of these processes are, and we'll learn more. It's not like we have all the answers. We as a community, and I'm not just saying ACBS, I mean, when we get down to this bottom-up kind of thing, we can do a heck of a lot more. But we're able to bring some of these deeper wisdoms that touch our own heart and bring them into human lives and get paid for it, even sometimes in settings where, we can't do long-term care. You've got 4 sessions. Okay, that's okay. Let's do something that really will echo down through that person's life if we're lucky. And will make a profound difference, and will open up some doors. And maybe with support, not just from the direct clinical work, but with support from the self-help books and from the websites and the peer support communities and so forth, that we can keep our eyes on the ball, which is how do we alleviate human suffering and put things into the culture that will be there to help your children's children's children, even if they don't know that it has anything to do with you, which they won't. And that's fine.
Well, perhaps as somewhat in closing, because we're probably reaching the end of our time today, and I really appreciate you making the time to kind of put this brief conversation out there among all the other resources that are out there, so maybe somebody connects with it.
Sure.
They can sort of say, all right, what do I do now? Like, if somebody is sufficiently inspired by some ACT material or even by our little conversation, where do they go next, and how do they take this further for themselves and their clients and community?
Well, what I typically, if somebody's sort of new to it, is I suggest that they pick up one of those books. I think some of the general self-help books, like The Happiness Trap or Get Out of Mind Into Your Life, or others. You just go to Amazon, put in acceptance and commitment therapy, it'll show up. And doing it for yourself helps, because you'll learn something, and if it resonates with you, so that's one possible route in. Another one is to look at what's there on the web, and the ACBS community has done a pretty amazing job of putting materials into a website, but it's not just there. There's many clinics and practitioners and folks who have websites, and again, just Googling acceptance and commitment therapy, you'll get to contextualpsychology.org, which is the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, ACBS, the community that's trying to develop ACT, and the larger set of basic science issues that surround ACT. If you spend a little time there, it's best to log into the site, because then you can see all the attachments and so forth. But you can spend hour after hour on that site learning. But soon enough, you're going to want to get to a workshop and do some actual training. And they're on the website as to where they are around the country. we're doing this for the Institute for the Advancement of Human Behavior, who have sponsored ACT workshops around the country and have some heart for the work. They've done some good things with us in terms of building the community. A good 2-day workshop will really tell you whether or not there's something in here. You'll hear it. The way I usually say it, it's like hearing a note on a tuning fork. If something kind of rings, regardless of how you came or where you came, or that's a reliable little moment.
Mm-hmm.
It probably happened to you, yes? Did you do an ACT workshop and hear that little ring, like there's something in here?
Yeah, absolutely. My experiences with ACT workshops have been really, really strong, and some, have been had direct behavioral consequences. I mean, when we worked, I was at your workshop and just volunteered to do the Monsters on the Bus exercise.
Tell the story.
Well, I was sort of really getting a lot out of the 2 days, and at the same time sitting with a knot in my stomach and solar plexus about what am I doing here for these 2 days? I have so much writing to get to. I have so much I should be doing. I'm doing this training, but I'm procrastinating. Listening to my mind go through all that, and the Monsters on the Bus or Passengers on the Bus exercise is this, famous ACT diffusion exercise, kind of representing moving yourself through life, even though there's these nettlesome, aggravating thoughts and feelings that keep trying to get you to turn the other way or stop your journey. And I used as the theme, the valued direction, the aim that I wanted to head was to complete some of this writing, complete some writing that I'd been really struggling with procrastinating. And it was highly anxiety provoking because, you were asking these questions like, so what gets in the way? And I'm, there's 100 odd people there and I'm 40, I'm saying things like a video game or, or self-criticism or, and the end result of the exercise was a really sort of an indelible experience of kind of getting really next to the things that were getting in my way and feeling in a public context what it was like to have those obstacles be present but to literally move forward. And I think since that time I've completed all of the projects that were on the docket and had new chapters and book proposals out, and it's been the most productive time in my life in terms of writing.
You're on fire, Dennis. Okay, how many books have you produced over the last little while? Since every time I turn around, I'm seeing a Dennis book.
Well, it's been really.
Tell some of the things you're doing, just so they know.
Well, there's this compassion-focused approach, the Compassionate Mind Guide to Overcoming Anxiety, which is a self-help book using Paul Gilbert's work with compassion-focused therapy to treat anxiety, and a book on emotion regulation with Bob Leahy and Lisa Napolitano, and another book on mindfulness. And we're working now on a book for Guilford on Buddhist psychology and ACT and CBT principles. So the workshop was really helpful, to say the least. It kind of, it just gave an anchor point, like a social contextual anchor point to say, like, you've had this experience and you know how to move through it. So on a Sunday afternoon, when my mind is telling me, you can't write, you're sunk, just take a walk or just watch the TV, veg out. There's another countervailing kind of perspective, which is like, gentler and open, and just says, okay, just get through a few keystrokes and see what happens on that screen in front of you. So ACT principles and processes, sort of starting from that workshop, but then being engaged with the community, they've just been really very helpful, actually.
Yeah. And one of the things I want people to notice is the things you're writing aren't just sort of like ACT uber alles books. I mean, they've touched the work, but you're like Compassionate Mind Therapy is a sister technology fellow traveler, and the mindfulness work as fellow travelers in motion regulation, and there's that quality. I mean, we're trying to take some of these principles and hook them up to other things that people are doing and create something that's bigger. And it fits kind of comfortably. So if you go to an ACBS convention or something, you're going to see probably DBT and MBCT or compassion-focused therapy. I tried to get Paul to come, and the last one we couldn't quite get him there, but we will. And as you know, I've had a role in trying to get some of his books over here in the U.S. and stuff, and now he no longer needs my help, but to actually get some publishers to take them seriously. And so the other part about that's worth noting, that little thing where we just stood up and we said, now what if going in this direction was important? What would all these passengers have to say? I noticed in your book you had children on the bus, and I love doing that. Of thinking almost that some of these barriers are like, some of them are very vulnerable, like kid-like, and like the 8-year-old I was talking about earlier. And I remember that I think we were up there probably 10 minutes, right? And we were walking, and we had 3 people in the audience being, hellacious, mindy, critical, etc. And you were kind of walking with them, chattering at it. I have a good image of it. Those kinds of things sort of stay with you. These kind of, for example, these rich metaphors, just lots of metaphors in the act work, lots of exercises in the act work. And it's not just because we like doing metaphors and exercises, because we're kind of like creating Christmas trees where we can hang these processes on them. My point of it is that you can get a lot done with a little. And I've seen, like this Passengers on the Bus one, when it's acted out in groups in the VA, let's say, I get letters from people saying, man, that was a pivotal moment. And not just that, but my own clients, but others who kind of. So I guess I'm saying your story kind of reflects multiple qualities of what it is we're trying to do. Dig down to the processes, find ways to sort of make them concrete and stick with you, and really sort of see to the essence of it in ways that they echo down through our life, and then let it, empower people to carry that energy forward in many, many different ways, including in this professional thing. We're just not going to be doing all the, 4 levels of the, $500 fee for the woo-woo stamp with the, where so many of our empirical traditions have turned into, I understand why, but it's not all bad, but these kind of clingy channeling of clinicians into the one way. Instead, let's kind of take what these core processes are and empower them, but take them out and then learn from them. Like the compassion-focused work is having a big impact on the ACT community. I think we've always had a little piece of it, but it helps us to see what that piece is. And the mindfulness work has had a big impact on the ACT community. We've been playing around with these processes, but we're now playing around with them as part of the larger group as well. So it's exciting to see where you took it, Dennis, both in terms of, how you took this personally and have brought it into your, but then also just what you produced with your professional work, because I see the heart that you bring to it all over it. And that's kind of what we want to do. If people are watching this and saying, well, what would I get out of ACT stuff? Yeah, you'll get techniques and stuff like that, but you'll get things that have a chance to deeply inform how to serve the people that you serve professionally, and do it in a way that empowers you to be more human and fully yourself. And I think we've always been up to that in clinical, but sometimes we've built these kind of structures in ways so that it hasn't always been the focus, especially, I have to say, in the empirically supported wing, when we've sometimes got so deep into doing it just by the book and things like that. And, so I'm glad you're part of the community, Dennis. And
well, thanks.
See where you've taken it, all this.
It's a great community to be a part of, and this is one of the reasons why we're really happy that you're going to be on the East Coast doing these workshops. And in our group, there's so many people who have had these sort of experiences in their ACT training and in their ACT practice and even in their ACT research. So it's a really cool time, and it seems like a natural place for us to probably conclude this discussion there, don't you think?
Yeah, it'll probably date it, but we will be back in New York and in Baltimore, and for IAHP, I'm going to be in Toronto. But it isn't just me and IAHP. If you go to the website and look, there's a lot of things going on, and IAHP has been really supportive of us. But you can see some of the other things doing. I know you're doing some workshops and stuff coming up, and so it is a good place to stop, but hopefully not in the sense of the conversation that we're having, but also the conversation that we're having with unseen others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, there are other people at the table here,
yeah,
at other times in other places, and I think we have something to say to them, which is we would like to invite you into a participatory process that is serious and about something that's worthy of our energy, of how to create a psychology more worthy to the challenge of the human condition. And the only way that can be done is with time and with people. That's a big project. We will be dead before that would ever be achieved. But wouldn't it be fun to really work together to try to do that? And that, folks, you'll find a serious group, serious and playful, who want to support that. So if that's of interest to people, they ought to come to an ACT training.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for your time. And thank you for whoever in space and time tunes into this conversation and takes part in it as at a distance. And good talking with you, Steve.
Good talking with you, Dennis.
Bye.
Take care.